Yes, I have a Swiftie, a 12-year-old
Yeah.
daughter named Grace, who's a Swiftie. She's actually been a little bit less of a Swiftie since Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, because my 12-year-old's a big Trump fan.
Oh,
I am not
wow.
a Trump fan, but my
Oh,
12-year-old is a
wow.
big Grace is a
Yeah.
big Trump fan, and
Yeah.
so she doesn't talk as much about Taylor. She still likes Taylor Swift a lot, but she doesn't talk as much about Taylor Swift. And my 7-year-old daughter really had a negative reaction towards the endorsement of Taylor Swift.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 233, and for the third time back, it's John Ziegler, who who hosts the Death of Journalism podcast. He's been in the media for almost 35 years. He's done sports and other things like that. So today we're just going to talk about what we think is going to happen with the presidential election, maybe the Congress, Senate, and other elections too. How are you, John?
I'm hanging in there, Chris.
So you're in California. What do you think is going to happen right now with the way the media is going? I mean, it's getting harder and harder to predict these things, but what do you think? Do you think Trump is going to win, or Harris is going to win, or is toss up? Or
Well, I've put a lot of thought into this over the last not just several months, but obviously even before Kamala Harris became the candidate. I've put a ton of thought into how Trump would do a third time around, and I am in the camp of people that still don't have an answer. I think anyone who tells you that they know for sure who's going to win this election is lying to you. Not just because the polls are so tight, but because this is such an unprecedented situation. We have really nothing to compare this to. We have someone who has been president before, who is running a third consecutive time. That's not happened in the modern history of the country.
Yes.
We have a person who's never received a vote for president in a primary, who was handed the nomination after the opposing party had their convention and after there was a first presidential debate in Kamala Harris. That's never happened before.
Yeah.
And we have a media landscape that is completely different than anything we've ever seen before. The old guard media officially is essentially dead. So it's very difficult to see. It used to be fairly easy to be able to tell, okay, what kind of media is breaking through and what is not. I did a documentary film about the 2008 election called Media Malpractice, How Obama Got Elected. And, that was a pretty easy time to do a documentary about the media, because the old rules still mattered. Well, we're in a completely new landscape now. And, more people probably watched Donald Trump on Joe Rogan than on any other avenue or outlet or medium other than the debate with Kamala Harris. And so it's very, very difficult to discern what information are the swing voters, the low information voters, dealing with. It's impossible to know these days because of the complete fragmentation of the news media. I think that the fragmentation of the news media has generally worked in Democrats' favor, which is counterintuitive. But the reason why I've always believed that is that when you create a conservative media, you're essentially doing a couple of things. You're having your own supporters live in a bubble. And there's no question that Republicans and Trump supporters live in a media bubble where they only get information that makes them feel good. But also the mainstream news media outlets no longer have any obligation to cater to conservatives at all. So they can really let their hair down and let their natural biases come out in a more dramatic fashion. And while the mainstream news media clearly doesn't have nearly the power they used to have, they still have some influence. They still have some ability to shape the narrative, especially for low information voters. And so I just think this is an exceedingly difficult election to call. I go back and forth between, do I lean towards Trump? Do I lean towards Harris having the advantage? I hate everything about this election. I mean, I hate everything about it, but I hate the fact that I am someone who generally believes that the conventional wisdom is almost always wrong because the news media is totally broken. And the conventional wisdom on this race has always been it's going to come down to Pennsylvania. And every time I look at it, no matter how it comes down rationally, it's going to come down to Pennsylvania. I mean, you tell me who's going to win Pennsylvania, my former home state, where I grew up. I'll tell you who's going to win the election. Now, that's not 100%, but it's probably at least 90% the case that whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win the election. And I just don't know who's going to win Pennsylvania. I do believe it will come down to Pennsylvania. I think slowly but surely the 7 swing states will be called. I think it's going to take a longer time than most people think. I do not believe we will certainly not have a concession speech on Tuesday night. There is no chance of that because the only way we would know that there's going to be a winner on Tuesday night for sure is if Harris won North Carolina and Georgia. If she wins North Carolina and Georgia, it's over. She's the winner. I don't think that that's likely to happen, but if it does, she will win. But under that scenario, there's no way that Trump is conceding. Certainly not on Tuesday night. He never conceded at all in 2020. He's not going to concede on Tuesday night just because he lost North Carolina and Georgia. So, the reverse, I don't think there's any way that unless it's something really crazy happens. I mean, even if Trump wins Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, and that's all called on Tuesday night, which would really be shocking. That would be shocking if for Trump to have a large enough margin where the media outlets universally called all 3 of those states. I just don't believe that that's in the realm of even close to likelihood. I mean, is it theoretically possible? Yes, but that's about the only scenario where you might see Harris forced to concede either Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning, because if she loses Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, it's pretty much over. It's very difficult to conceive of a scenario where she wins under that circumstance. But I just don't think Pennsylvania is going to be won by either side by a large enough margin for it to be called. And my current view of this race is that eventually we're going to see North Carolina and Georgia go for Trump, Michigan go for Harris, Arizona go for Trump. Nevada, I don't have a good handle on, partially because I haven't been that interested in Nevada because there are very few scenarios where Nevada actually makes the difference, almost none. But there are. I was just looking on Twitter before we started taping this. There are people claiming to be experts who will tell you that Nevada is a done deal for Trump, and based upon the early voting, and there are others that will say Nevada is a done deal for Harris based upon the early voting. I think Nevada will be very, very close. I don't know who would win that eventually. Trump could win that, but again, that doesn't really matter, and that will leave Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And I think we're basically, facing a situation where we could have 2 states that are effectively Florida 2000, where when with Trump involved in that equation, it's going to be way worse under this scenario than the 2000 recount was, because there you had one state and you were living in a fairly normal time, and George W. Bush and Al Gore went at each other with everything they had, but neither one of them was Donald Trump, and we were living in a very different media landscape, and we got through that barely, but we did get through that. I think there's a very plausible, if not likely, scenario where we have 2 Floridas, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and then it comes down to basically what's going to happen is that when all the dust settles, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin will yet to be called. If Trump wins one of them, under the scenario I'm outlining, he's president. And under that scenario, good luck to the country, because if Harris wins both of those, Trump will be screaming bloody murder about a stolen election. His cult will believe him. The conservative media will amplify that. If Trump wins one of those states, the left-wing world will have a total meltdown. They will think that Hitler has been reelected and that democracy is in peril. There's no good scenario there. None. And so I hate everything about this campaign. I hate the candidates. I hate the horrendous nature of the media coverage. It has been ridiculously, it's just absurd on so many levels. It's been unfair. It's been trivial. Major issues have been completely ignored. There's no substance to this campaign at all. And now we have a situation where it could be very, very close, and the country is just not prepared for the aftermath of that. And we're so divided that I don't see how we handle. I mean, again, I lived through the 2000 recount. I just don't know how we live through a situation that could be even worse than that, with all the changes that have happened in our media and our culture and our politics since 2000, in the last 24 years. So I'm not optimistic at all about how this is all going to turn out, and I don't know for sure who's going to win. If you put a gun to my head right now, I'd probably say Trump wins Pennsylvania, because Harris didn't pick Josh Shapiro, and that would end up being the difference as her vice presidential nominee. But I'm not confident about that. I can certainly see Harris winning Pennsylvania and also Wisconsin. So I'm in the camp of it's going to be really close, and the situation is wrought with danger, and either side could win. I don't believe that Trump is a lock, but I also think that Harris has some major problems. And so that's where I am currently.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance that this ends up being a landslide for either one of them? I mean, it sounds like we're going to end up in a situation where either the side that loses is going to say it was stolen.
Yeah. It's really hard for me. First of all, definition of landslide has completely changed. We've gotten used to very, very close elections. I mean, take a look at what happened in 1984 or 1988. Those were landslides for Republican candidates. 1972 was a landslide for Richard Nixon. Democrats don't tend to win in landslides anymore. The closest they've had to a landslide, I guess, was 1996 and Bill Clinton over Robert Dole. Obama beat McCain pretty well, but that was a little bit closer than most people realized. Not that Obama was going to lose at the end, but anyway, I really don't see the scenario where Trump wins in a massive landslide, and there are a lot of Trump fans that believe that this is going to happen. I mean, Dick Morris, of all people, just predicted a Trump landslide victory, which to me is a bad sign for Trump, because Dick Morris is never right about anything. This election is going to solve one thing for sure, and that is who's the bigger fraud. Jim Cramer from CNBC, who said that Harris would win, and he's always wrong. And Dick Morris says that Trump will win in a landslide, and he's always wrong. So something has to give there. But I think that the people that believe that Trump will win a landslide believe that for the third consecutive election cycle, that there's going to be massive polling error or significant polling error, essentially against him. In other words, he's doing better than the polls suggest. And that's what happened in 2016. It's what happened in 2020. I just don't believe it's going to happen a third time in a row, because I believe that the polling industry has largely adjusted for their past mistakes. I also believe that 2020 was an obviously unique election because of the COVID panic. And so it's very difficult to compare anything to 2020. The polls in 2022, the midterm election, turned out to be pretty darn accurate, more accurate than Republicans were counting on. Republicans thought there would be a landslide red wave there, and that did not turn out to be the case. So I just don't buy this idea that, well, if we compare Trump to where he was at this stage in 2016 and 2020, he's in great shape. I think the polls are probably more accurate. And I also think, by the way, there's at least a chance that the polls are overestimating Trump's appeal because of their fear of having underestimated him each of the past 2 cycles. So I think that is a possible scenario. And under that scenario, Harris wins every swing state. I mean, or almost every swing state, and could have an electoral college landslide. Now, I don't see Harris winning the popular vote by more than 3 points. I think she'll probably win it by about a point and a half, somewhere in there, 2 points at the top, at tops. By the way, I think it'll take a long time for that to be realized. I think that, by Wednesday morning, it might even look like Trump is winning the popular vote, but that's before California counts their votes. And here in California, we take forever to count all our votes. So anyway, I just I don't see Trump winning in a landslide. I think that there's a scenario where Harris wins in what feels like a landslide in comparison to what we're expecting, and that is that she runs the table and wins, 6 or maybe even 7 of these swing states. I don't think she'll win 7 of the swing states, but she could win 6 of them. I think, other than Georgia, she probably she could win all of them. But I think that I think even that's unlikely. I think Trump's a pretty good bet in Georgia and Arizona. But she could win, if the polls are wrong and they're overestimating Trump's support by even just a little bit, she could run the table. And by the way, under that scenario, if she won all 6 or 7 swing states by small margins, Trump's people would still be screaming stolen election, because they would say, see, they stole it in 6 or 7 different states by small margins. And that would basically just be an exaggeration of their argument in 2020. Their argument in 2020, their argument in 2020 was bogus, but it had a semblance of rationality to it. When you looked at the Electoral College, it didn't look close at all. In fact, it was the exact same margin by which Trump won in 2016, only reversed. But if you take 45,000 votes in 3 different states, Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, and you flip those votes, that's basically a small college football crowd. You flip those in 3 different states total. And now we have a 269 electoral college tie. It goes to the House of Representatives. There's probably a civil war, but Trump wins under that scenario. So even 2020 was closer than certainly the liberal media will admit for either side. The scenario where Harris ends up winning by a large electoral college margin makes more sense to me than the scenario where Trump wins by a large electoral college margin. But let's be clear. We basically have 7 coin flips. And, statistically, it's unusual for someone to win 5, 6, or 7 out of 7 coin flips, but it's statistically possible. Statistics will tell you that generally in 7 coin flips, you're going to win either 3, 4, or 5 of them, like 90% of the time. I don't know what the exact statistics are, but statistically, that's the most logical result with 7 coin flips. And that's basically what we have here is 7 coin flips. And it just kind of depends on which direction the wind is blowing, not just on election day, but leading up to election day.
Yeah, wow. It's certainly, yeah. Do you think what do you not like about Harris? And you being from California, you probably know a lot that you can say about it. I know what bothers me most about her.
Well, there's a lot I don't like about Harris. The first thing I don't like about Harris is that she was handed the nomination without a vote, without any sort of process. And this happened after the Republicans had their convention, after they picked their VP candidate, after there was a presidential debate. So I am offended by the process by which Harris was handed the Democratic nomination. I think the media went right along with it. They cheerleaded this. They helped enable it by getting rid of Biden. And I think the Trump campaign did a really, really lousy job of anticipating this scenario and cutting off the escape hatches for the trap the Democrats were in after that first debate where Biden was exposed as not being capable of serving another 4 years as president. And so I don't like that. I also, you mentioned California. People don't understand how completely unvetted Kamala Harris is in her entire life and her career because of the fact that she came from California as a woman of color who's a woke liberal in California and who had, very good connections, starting with her romantic affair with Willie Brown, who was a married man at the time and mayor of San Francisco, who really jump-started her career. She has had her way paved for her at every step. And, in San Francisco as a DA and in California as Attorney General, as a Democrat, you do not get vetted at all, because you have no Republican Party and you have no news media that is serious enough to do any vetting. So she's a completely unvetted person who gets handed then the U.S. Senate seat in California. Again, no vetting, no Republican Party, no news media. She runs for president in 2020. Again, no vetting because she's a woman of color and no one wants to leave a mark on her because she's not a threat. She dropped her. And then in the middle of COVID, she gets handed in a DEI selection the vice presidential nomination. I mean, Joe Biden essentially acknowledged this was a DEI selection, admitted to it, bragged about it. And, she becomes the vice presidential nominee, partially because of COVID. There's no vetting of her then at all. I mean, she didn't get anywhere close to the Sarah Palin treatment. My God. I mean, she wasn't even an issue in the 2020 campaign, her history of being a radical left, somewhat Marxist. I mean, I'm not even, the other part about Harris I don't like, I honestly don't even understand or know for sure what she believes. I don't even know if she knows what she believes. Because if you take a look at her positions in that 2020 presidential primary and compare them to what she's pretending to be today, just 4 years later, just over 4 years later, it's night and day. I mean, it's not even close. So I don't know what she really believes, but I wish somebody would have asked her some legitimate questions to find out what she really believes. I mean, she, before she ran for president, she kept saying almost on a loop, we need to see what can be unburdened by what has been. Well, first of all, I'd like to know what she thinks that means. But second of all, that is a statement right out of Marxism. That is a statement, and she said this on dozens and dozens of occasions publicly. It's her favorite saying. Well, I hope people will think about what that actually seemingly means. Unburdened by what has been means we throw out everything on which this country has been based, because those are burdens. Those are burdens. And for us to get to where we want to be in this liberal woke world, we need to be unburdened by what has been. And nobody even asked her that question. Sure, I think I know what it means. But so I don't, those are the reasons I don't like her. I don't think she's necessarily a bad person, but I don't really feel like I know who she is.
Yeah, that's one of the. I have to say, my biggest issue is just the fact of this, the accusations of prosecutorial misconduct. If you're bending the rules to keep people in jail or bending the rules to put them in jail, you have no business ever holding any public office again. That's bigger than anything. Although, yeah, there's.
I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen it. One of the more disturbing clips.
Yeah.
One of the more disturbing clips that has gotten around on social media, and I've shared it a couple times. In fact, one time I shared it, it got several million views, I think. On a couple of different occasions, and I think this is why this is significant. This wasn't just a one-off. She bragged about the power she had as a prosecutor and her ability to abuse that power to destroy people's lives. I'm not exaggerating. Look it up for yourself. where she learned, and she went into great detail about how she learned that with a swipe of her pen, she could destroy people's lives with false accusations and get them to be intimidated into doing what she wanted. I mean, that's almost word for word what she said. Now, people tried to claim, well, she was talking in general about what a prosecutor can do. No, she was referring to herself, and she did this on multiple occasions over multiple years. So this was not, an out of context situation. So
Yeah.
I think she's a very scary person.
So what do you not like about Trump?
Well, as a conservative, he's not a conservative. He's a lifelong liberal. He he has no real beliefs.
Yeah.
He has no real knowledge of what the system is about. He changes his positions based upon the direction of the wind, what he thinks is good for him at the time. He doesn't fulfill his promises. He's a pathological. He's the loser. He lost the House, the Senate, and the White House in 4 years, which is unprecedented in the modern history of America. And so, me, I don't think he's psychologically qualified for the job. I don't think he's a conservative. I think if he wins, he becomes a demigod, partially because of all the lawfare against him, which I think has been mostly unfair, as well as the assassination attempts and everything else they've thrown at him. So he's going to be a demigod if he wins, which means he already owns the Republican Party, but his family, if he were to win this election, his family, the Trump name, would own the Republican Party into perpetuity. And I don't think that that's good for the country. And so there are a lot of things I don't like about Donald Trump. I've never voted for him, and I never will vote for him.
Yeah, the lawfare is so disgusting. I don't, they are. It is amazing how hard the left is working to make him a sympathetic character, and he's not really a sympathetic character. But yeah, the lawsuits which are completely ridiculous and all this other stuff, that, and that's mostly coming out of New York, I believe. Letitia James and some of this other stuff. If I try to sell my house and I say that it's, worth 100,000, I try to highball it with a price, and then I guess that's fraud now. No, that's just how you negotiate. It's remarkable to me that.
I agree with you about the Letitia James situation. That to me was really egregious, and on appeal, the judges really eviscerated her case. The media ignored that, but I agree with you that was completely ridiculous.
And I have to say, this is very troubling to see what's happening with these lawyers and these judges, because it's a lot harder to unseat them, and it makes me wonder what's happening, in the law schools nowadays. It's a scary thought, really, that now you just that there basically is no law. What do you think about Walz and Vance?
Well, I think that Tim Walz was a mistake.
Yeah.
I think that if she had picked Josh Shapiro, that she would be for sure winning Pennsylvania. And I think that it wouldn't have hurt her at all in Wisconsin or Michigan. Now, I know that they were concerned about picking Shapiro as a Jewish pro-Israel candidate, about how that would play in Michigan. I think that was an overblown concern. I mean, to me, you got to win Pennsylvania first, and you have a sure bet if you pick Josh Shapiro. By the way, as you know, because of my role in the Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky scandal, I loathe Josh Shapiro. I think he's a terrible human being. And but I fully acknowledge that he's popular enough in Pennsylvania, the state where he's governor, that he would win, that he would help Harris win the state. And I don't think Walz helps her at all. I don't think Walz helps her. I mean, look at what's happened in Wisconsin, which is the neighboring state. He's the governor,
Yes.
where people in Wisconsin have a better idea of who Tim Walz is than anybody else. And Wisconsin is neck and neck. And that was not the case,
Yeah.
before Walz was chosen. And so Walz hasn't helped at all in Wisconsin. And you could argue he may have even hurt in Wisconsin. So I don't know where Walz helps. And I also think he would be a terrible president. I mean, he's a pathological liar about his own
Yeah.
history. He's not very bright. He's weird. He's super liberal. He was terrible during COVID, awful during COVID. How that didn't become a major issue in this campaign, I don't know. It's incredibly frustrating. So I think Walz is terrible. I think JD Vance was selected based upon a reality that did not exist. He was selected to go up against Kamala Harris in a vice presidential debate, and so I think it's been a little unfair to JD Vance because he was really put in a position that he wasn't expected to have to face. He won the debate against Walz. I thought he actually missed a few opportunities to hammer Walz, but I think JD Vance has saved his candidacy. At first, it was perceived as a negative on the Trump ticket. I think after the debate and some other media appearances where he's done a great job of taking on the news media, I think people have now, at least on the Republican side, see that Vance's selection was a good one and that Vance has a great future in the Republican Party, regardless. Obviously, his future is a lot brighter if Trump wins and he's the vice president. If Trump wins, Vance is in the driver's seat to be the 2028 Republican presidential nominee. I mean, it's almost a lock,
Yes.
although we saw what happened with Mike Pence. It didn't work out with Mike Pence, but I think JD Vance is a better political maneuverer than Mike Pence, smarter than Mike Pence, knows how to deal with Trump probably better than Mike Pence did. And so, if Trump wins, I think JD Vance is the future of the Republican Party, which I think would be a much better situation than we currently have. But of course, all that depends on how long Trump lives and how healthy he is. I mean, Trump can change everything on a dime by just deciding he doesn't like JD Vance anymore and he's going to endorse somebody else, like maybe his son. Who knows? But that's the next step down the road. But I think people need to understand, and this is one of the many, many issues that has not been even remotely adjudicated during this campaign. We're in an unprecedented circumstance here in so many ways. If Trump wins, he is a lame duck on day one. The 2028 presidential election effectively starts probably in February of next year. I mean, that's we've never had that before, but that because Trump is termed out,
Yes.
That's going to be the reality. And I also don't think that's I don't think that's good for anybody. So there are really very few good scenarios in this whole situation.
Yeah, we're always be in an election cycle. By the way, everyone, John has done some excellent work on investigating the Jerry Sandusky situation with Penn State. He's done a few other interviews about this if you look them up. So on Lions of Liberty, I think also on Thaddeus Russell's show and maybe a few others. But yeah, there's some good work there. Yeah, I don't. When I heard about Vance, it reminded me of this old line that some were born great, some achieve greatness, and some were born in Ohio. I mean, we had so many presidential candidates from Ohio because it was populated and it was also, just kind of in the middle of things. So, and apparently no red president has ever won without Ohio.
Well, that's true, I think. Yeah. And, it's kind of amazing what has happened to the electoral map in the last couple of decades. I'm one of those that believes that the country has drifted further and further left.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways it has. And in a lot of ways, Republicans are almost locked out of the presidency, a red state. Florida has gone from a purple state to a red state. Missouri has gone from a purple state to a red state. Iowa has gone from a purple state to a red state. And, there might be one or two others that are in that category. Now, of
West
course,
Virginia
in the
certainly
other
went from
direct,
a very solid blue state to a very solid red state.
that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
From a presidential standpoint, they have been they're in Appalachia. We still see this in Kentucky.
Yeah.
In Appalachia, there's still, although it's no longer really the case, but for decades there was this cultural identity of people thinking of themselves as Democrats, but in presidential elections they vote for Republicans, and because they're actually conservative. They're the last of the Mohicans when it came to conservative Democrats. So they call themselves Democrats. They vote Democrat on a local level, like for instance, Andy Beshear in Kentucky
Yes.
is the governor of Kentucky state. And I've lived in Kentucky. I've effectively lived in West Virginia. Of course, on the other side of these states flipping from purple to red, the Democrats are constantly, basically lusting, fantasizing about the day that Texas goes from red to truly purple. And we're getting closer to that. There's no question that the data indicates that we're getting closer to that. I don't think Texas is in remote play this time around. And I'm pretty confident that Ted Cruz is going to win his Senate seat there, hopefully with some margin for error. And so, but eventually, the way the demographics are running, Texas could flip, much like Florida has gone in the other direction. And once that happens, it's over. There is no path for a Republican president if Texas turns to be blue. There's just no path. And again, I don't know how many more cycles we have, but not too many. And so I think that's a big problem going forward.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It is interesting. You mentioned some of these states that went purple that went red. It's I haven't thought that much about it, but when Walz got nominated, I inevitably thought of Mondale just because he's from Minnesota, and we know how that worked out. Do you think there's some? I mean, he just seems like this. When there's that commercial where that showed him a picture of him and a picture of Curly, and I just see it's almost like they wanted to put up some white guy who looks like a bumbling idiot, like Homer Simpson or something like that.
Well, I think that you're onto something in that. I think that Democrats wanted to appeal to middle-aged white males, but in selecting Tim Walz, they showed that they have no understanding of the middle-aged white male. The middle-aged white male's greatest fear is to be marginalized and subservient to a woman who is not as qualified as he is, especially a woman who's in that position for multiple DEI characteristics, like in the case of Harris, who is a woman of color. And so Tim Walz is actually living the nightmare of the middle-aged white male, where he's completely subservient to an unqualified woman of color. And he acts like he's completely subservient to her. So how does that appeal to middle-aged white men? It's, it's like, I have this thing about commercials making a cardinal error or cardinal sin. And that is that, to me, in a commercial, you should never have something bad happen to your customer, to your target customer. And we do occasionally see commercials where something bad in the commercial will happen to your target customer. And I've never thought that those commercials are particularly effective. Well, that's what Tim Walz is. Tim Walz is a commercial where your target audience is having something bad happen to them. And, and again, I don't think this is conscious, but I think it's subconscious, and I think that it does have an effect.
John, this is something else too that's finally getting discussed. This is going to be a very divisive election between male and female.
Oh yeah.
You,
No,
you,
the
you've,
gender
and
gap.
you've actually got advertisements now saying, women, you don't have to tell your husband how you vote. Which, what do you make of this?
Well, first of all, the gender gap has never been larger. I'm actually kind of
Yeah.
amazed it's not even larger than it is. I mean, we have obviously not just a male and a female running against each other, but we have a very male-focused campaign on the Trump side, a very female-focused campaign on the Harris side. I'm amazed that the gender gap isn't even larger. My theory is that the Trump campaign, I would like to believe that there's a strategy here. And that strategy is they believe that there are more votes to be gained by appealing to men than there are female votes to be lost. They know that they're never going to get a certain sliver of the female vote. And I think what they're banking on, but I think what they're banking on is that there is a certain percentage of women who, first of all, like men. They
Yes.
want men to be in charge. They're more traditional. They're more traditional minded women. But there are also a lot of women out there that are actually tougher on women than men are, and they don't really like Kamala Harris. They don't like
Oh yeah.
the fact that she's been handed everything. They don't think that she's a particularly great representative of women, and these are not liberal women. I'm talking about these are more moderate women.
Yeah.
And so, if there's a strategy here, I think that's what the Trump team is banking on, that they will get a certain percentage of women simply because they're, whatever that percentage is, 40% of women, whatever in that range, are people that actually want men in charge. They want an alpha male to be their leader, and that's kind of
Yeah.
an evolutionary or primal view of things. Now, I don't know whether or not that's going to win the day or not. You inadvertently raised an interesting situation about, women. You don't have to tell your husband who you're voting for. I actually think that this is one of the most under thought about, or certainly underreported elements of universal mail-in balloting. Now, we only have a few states that have universal mail-in balloting. One of them I live in is California. And I actually think, and there's no way to prove this, I think that one of the many problems with universal mail-in voting is that I think you have a lot of spouses that either fill out their ballot for their spouse, or at the very least are basically have their nose in those votes. They're leaning over their shoulder when that vote is cast. And I think that there's a lot of marriages where that prevents people from voting for whom they really want. And by the way, I think my gut tells me there are probably more women in dominant positions in those marriages now than men. In other words, there are more men who are being intimidated into voting in a universal mail-in ballot situation for Harris, either consciously or subconsciously, than there
Right.
are women being intimidated into voting for Trump because their husband will be upset with them. I mean, let's just think about the normal marriage. The normal marriage is far more likely to be dominated by the woman than by the man. And certainly in the political realm, it would be bullying and badgering and inappropriate for a man. It would be sexual harassment for a man to badger his wife into voting for Trump. But a man who knows what's good for him is probably going to give in if he's on the fence and decide, screw it, I'll vote for Harris and my
Yeah.
wife won't be mad at me. So I actually think, and there's no way to know how many votes this is, but I actually think Trump loses votes in mail-in balloting because of that. There's another aspect of mail-in balloting and universal mail-in, which is I am totally convinced that a lot of older people and infirm people and recently dead people have their ballots filled out by their children or their grandchildren. And
Yes.
inherently, the younger the person is who fills out the ballot, the more likely they are to be liberal. And so I think that also helps the Democratic Party. How much, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I think it helps.
Yeah, I never thought of all the potential for fraud there, John. And John, this brings up an issue for me that I always talk about. My mother worked the polls for well over 30 years, and I think she started doing that, in the 60s or maybe the 50s. I'm not really sure, but when mother started working the polls, almost all of the poll workers were housewives.
Okay.
I grew up in Moundsville where we had, I think we had, about 1,000 people living in a precinct. And as a result of that, everybody knew who everybody was. I mean, when people
Hmm.
bring up the issue of voter ID, and I understand why they bring it up, but I said, this is what it was like. Everybody knew who everybody was, and that's why there was nobody asking for ID because they didn't have to. Feminism took women out of the house into the workplace, and I remember around the 90s, mother was always asking, "Hey, we need somebody to work the polls. We can't find people to work the polls." And now a lot of the people who work polls are retirees, but I also think maybe that's led to consolidations of precincts, less voting places, and as a result, you end up with people, you hear these stories about people waiting 2 hours in line and stuff like that, and I never saw anything like that in the town where I grew up.
Well, I strongly uh, disagree with how we've changed voting, especially
Yeah.
after the COVID panic.
Oh yeah.
I think it should be on election day. I think it should be a communal event. I think, I think, frankly, we're making it too easy for people to vote, not just because of potential fraud or corruption,
Mhm.
but also, frankly, I think if you don't know who you're voting for, you shouldn't vote. And the easier you make it for people to vote, the more
Yeah.
likely ignorant voters are going to cast their ballots. Um, and so I hate the entire concept of mail-in voting, but I think there's
Yeah.
far more corruption.
I wonder if it also helps. In some of the Latin American countries, a lot of the elections are on Sunday, so everybody's off work. Maybe that would be an improvement.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that the work day Tuesdays have always pretty much worked for
Yeah.
us. And then you got football. How you going to have you want
That's
women to
true.
win?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
If you
true.
want
Yeah.
women to dominate elections, put the election on a football Sunday.
Yeah. I
That'll
guess
be
so. Yeah. Yeah. It has it certainly has traditionally been a Tuesday. I mean, it's certainly very interesting. Yeah. I never thought of the mail-in voting thing, but yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for fraud there. Dead people or kids filing ballots or whatever, maybe to parents filling out ballots for kids who still live at home and stuff like that. Uh, yeah, mail-in voting. I find it really troubling though that you're going to actually try to I don't see men, and from what I've also heard too, it's mostly the single women who are voting very much for Harris. I don't know about the married women; they tend to be more conservative.
Well, I mean, that's obviously because of the abortion issue.
Yeah.
I think that Taylor Swift's endorsement, while it was kind of muted and she hasn't gone out of her way to do anything
Mhm.
for the Harris campaign, I think that the Taylor Swift's endorsement matters because she runs a cult, and those people will do anything that she says. And
Yeah.
I don't know how many votes that matters, but I think it matters. And I think if Harris wins, it will be because of young single females, and whether or not they turn out. If they turn out
Yeah.
in the numbers that Democrats are hoping for, I think she wins the election, and she might win it, you know, fairly easily in comparison to what we're currently expecting.
Isn't one of your little girls a Swiftie or not?
Yes, I have a Swiftie, a 12-year-old
Yeah.
daughter named Grace, who's a Swiftie. She's actually been a little bit less of a Swiftie since Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris because my 12-year-old's a big Trump fan.
Oh
I am not
wow.
a Trump fan, but my
Oh
12-year-old is a
wow.
big Grace is a
Yeah.
big Trump fan, and
Yeah.
so she doesn't talk as much about Taylor. She still likes Taylor Swift a lot, but she doesn't talk as much about Taylor Swift. And my 7-year-old daughter really had a negative reaction towards the endorsement of Taylor Swift. Although hilariously, and Diana, my 7-year-old, knows nothing about politics. Nothing. We never talked to her about
Yeah.
politics. And
You're not really that much aware at 7.
but
At
she
least I wasn't.
inherently, I think this is so funny. She inherently has expressed concerns on multiple occasions about the Taylor Swift endorsement. My 7-year-old has said to me, "Wow, Dad, Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala? That's really bad. She represents like 1,000,000,000,000 people." I mean, and so even my 7-year-old daughter understands how powerful Taylor Swift is, and I'm not exaggerating. She has brought this up on multiple occasions. Her concern about Taylor Swift's influence, because she does not like Kamala at all, or Kamala. I forget how she pronounces her, how my daughter pronounces her name, but she is very anti-Kamala for some reason. I realize people will think it's because of things she's heard in the house, and I'm sure that's had some influence. But we do not talk to our kids about politics in any direct way very often. And
I've noticed a lot of teenagers though just tend to follow what they learned at home, and then they go off to college, and it's like, oh, I'm dumping all this, But teenagers are still living at home. They do tend to. I've noticed they tend to follow their parents. Although you might grow up in a split house, but yeah, that's very interesting. I would, you never hear about Taylor, ever getting arrested or anything. I wouldn't feel bad if I had a little girl like Taylor Swift. I mean, there are a lot worse girls you could look up to, or worse women you look up to. Anyway, so what do you think about the House and the Senate and all this? How do you think this might turn out?
What might turn out?
The House of Representatives and the Senate. I mean, what are they going to look like? Because obviously, whoever wins, what are they going to have to work with?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My current prediction in the House and the Senate is that I think Democrats will take the House by a small margin. I think it'll be mostly because of what happens here in California. I think that there are about 4 or 5 Republican congressmen or women here in California who are Republicans who won on a razor's edge in 2022. And I think in 2024, they have a couple of significant disadvantages. I think now that Donald Trump is on the ballot, that will bring out a lot more Democratic voters. I think the fact that Kamala Harris is on the ticket, and she's from California, will bring out more Democratic voters in California. I think losing Kevin McCarthy from here in California. So I think Republicans will lose several House seats. I don't think they'll lose all of them, but I think they get easily California. And right there, the majority is gone. That's how slim the Republican majority is. And then if you lose a couple in New York and maybe a couple in Florida that you won in a very good year of 2022 in Florida, now all of a sudden Democrats have about a 5, 6, 7, 8 seat lead, and that's where I think it's going to end up. I mean, probably in the 5 to 10 range, which is a pretty insignificant and frankly problematic majority, but it does have some implications. So if I had to guess, I'd say that Democrats win the House by about 5 seats, maybe up to 10. I don't think they're going to win by more than 10. But I think it's impossible to know that for sure. But my gut tells me 5 to 10 seat majority for the House.
Yep.
And I think, and part of this is hopeful on my part, and I always get nervous when I'm hopeful, but I'm very much rooting for a Republican majority in the Senate. And I think Republicans are pretty solid at the 51 number. I think they have a really good shot. Maybe you could tell me more about Ohio, but I think if Moreno wins in Ohio, then I think that they end up with 52 seats. Then I think you have real control.
Well, one thing, if Vance becomes vice president, who goes into his slot?
Well, I'm not a fan of Mike DeWine. I loathe Mike DeWine.
Mike DeWine is he's absolutely horrible. This is a guy who got F ratings from Gun Owners of America.
Yeah, I expressed concerns about J.D. Vance's selection at the time because of this very issue. So you want Mike DeWine to select J.D. Vance's replacement? I mean, that's very dangerous. I don't know who he would select. One of my listeners on the Death of Journalism podcast suggested he might pick John Boehner as a stopgap till the next election, which I think that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if conservatives would be too happy about that, but I actually like John Boehner to a certain degree. But I am not confident that Mike DeWine would hit out of the park with his selection of J.D. Vance. But if Trump wins, Mike DeWine would be in kind of a difficult spot, because is he really going to buck the president of the United States and the vice president from his home state and select a weak Republican? That would be hard for me to believe he's going to do that. I mean, I think DeWine is an idiot and an a-hole. And so I think anything's possible. He completely screwed the pooch on COVID. And he also, in a case that I know you're familiar with, the so-called Steubenville High School football rape case, in my view, he completely exposed himself as corrupt to the nth degree on that case. And so I don't have any faith in him at all. But that's a good problem to have. If you're somebody like me who wants Republicans to control the Senate, the worst, you could do a lot worse than having Republicans have 51 or 52 seats in the Senate with J.D. Vance there to break any ties.
Yeah.
And your only concern is who Mike DeWine chooses as at this moment.
Yeah. I lived in Columbus, for 6 years, but one thing I distinctly remember about it, Ohio is all people like, George Voinovich and Jim Rhodes. I mean, Ohio was a very low tax state, say back in 1970. It was people like Jim Rhodes and George Voinovich who shot the taxes up as much as anything. There was nobody like Ron Paul in Ohio. Nobody. I mean, it was just,
who do you think's gonna win the Senate race there?
I'm not really following it that close anymore, because I live in Texas now. I think Cruz will win. I mean, there's nobody even. I don't even remember Ohio having anybody even like Ted Cruz. Who's not perfect, but certainly better than a lot of the people in the Senate.
Well, the Moreno versus Brown race in Ohio could be very pivotal, because even if Republicans win in Montana, which they're favored to do so, and they win in West Virginia, which is a lock, that would get them theoretically 51 without any upsets on the other side. And to me, you got to get to 52, because if you get to 52, especially if Trump is president, if you get to 52 and Trump's the president, now you completely control the Senate. If you get to 52 and Harris is the president, you pretty much control the Senate, because Murkowski and Collins are somewhat neutralized, because they, the two of them together would have to combine with every single Democrat to get it to be a tie that would be broken by Tim Walz. So that would still be problematic. But if you get to 52 and Trump's the president, you control the U.S. Senate, which is incredibly important, because Clarence Thomas is going to have to think about retiring soon, and his replacement will be very key to the direction of the future of the U.S. Supreme Court.
We're going back to 90 or 91 with him now. Yeah, he's getting close to the record. If he sticks around much longer, I mean, I think 36, 37 years. Yeah, he's
well.
Yeah,
there's no way he outlives an 8-year Kamala Harris presidency.
Yeah.
So that is probably the strongest argument if you're a conservative for wanting Trump to win, because then he would select Thomas's replacement theoretically imminently.
Yeah. So, well, that's good to know. What do you think if Trump wins? What do you think happens in 2028?
Well, assuming that JD Vance doesn't
Yep.
doesn't fall out with Trump, which is always possible, I think JD Vance is clearly the Republican presidential nominee in 2028, and he probably goes up against Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan. That's probably what would be the most likely scenario.
Oh my God. Oh, she's even more. She's got to be the most unlikable woman I've ever seen anywhere. I
Look,
mean,
I'm just telling
We're
you the
talking
most
Faye
likely
Dunaway
scenario.
and Mommy Dearest here. Oh,
No, I think she's
I mean,
terrible too, but
yeah, I mean that's what I'm comparing her to. I mean,
they're
geez. Oh, if they really want, they really wanted. It's almost like women are begging men to create a Taliban or something. I mean, oh, compare that to Sarah Palin, who was at least, seemed like a pretty likable girl that you could hang out with and have a pizza with. I mean, geez. Well, this has been a good show, John. Where can we find you out there on the net?
the death of journalism podcast. You can subscribe to
Yes.
that, and you can follow me on Twitter at Zygmunt Freud,
Yes.
Zigman Freud. Zygmunt
Yeah.
Freud is where I post on a regular basis on Twitter or X.
Anything else to say before we go? Or
always good to talk to you, Chris. And let's
yeah,
hope that we somehow get through this week safely.
hopefully, yes.
Because I'm
I
not
don't know.
100%
Yeah, and John, I don't know
sure
if
we're
you've
going
been
to be
paying
able to do
attention.
so.
I don't know if you've been looking at my coverage, but I'm a huge fan of Javier Milei. I don't know if you follow him at all, but he's doing some amazing stuff. But anyway, yeah, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. I've also got you can also give money at buymeacoffee.com and check out my Substack, which I need to update soon. Thank you, John Ziegler. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.